I have a I have a lot of um head pain, pain in my uh neck. Um, I'm just gonna try to focus on the reading and mm, not the pain. Okay. So like yesterday, um, we ended on a Tracy chapter in July 1975. So remember they're on the survival trip, and Barbara took the flashlight um and left to see supposedly her boyfriend. That Tracy doesn't know who this is, mystery person. And so that's the last thing is she sees the beam from the flashlight until even that was gone. And we pick up today on a Tracy chapter again, but this time uh July 1975. Still, I'm assuming immediately after. Tracy slept fitfully, woken by cold and sometimes by the sound of one of the other campers tending the fire. At some point, she opened her eyes to find that it was light out and that she was still alone in the tent. Tracy sat up quickly, afraid now. Everyone else was still sleeping. She tiptoed to Lowell and Walter's tent and leaned down next to Lowell, whispering his name until he opened one eye. Barbara's not here, she said. She's gone. Lowell blinked in the sunlight, rubbed his eyes, stretched. What are you talking about? Said Lowell. I just saw her. She was getting more wood. Sure enough, from behind a little copse of trees came Barbara, arms full of branches, gathering kindling to fuel their morning fire. She grinned at Tracy. Good morning, she mouthed. Their plan for the day was to set up simple squirrel poles, which TJ had taught them to do in their outdoorsmanship classes. Barbara, of course, oversaw. By evening, the squirrel traps were empty of both bait and squirrels. Someone had found a small patch of berries, but the walk to retrieve them had no doubt cost more energy than the berries themselves would provide. The mood had changed. With nothing to do, they waited for dinner. For the small portions of canned beans and gorp that Barbara had reserved for the night's meal. The younger campers were complaining of hunger. The older ones were annoyed. Barbara, determined, set off one more time into the woods to check the traps. And in a moment, they heard a yell. Tracy stood up. Across the campsite, she could see Lowell standing too, and then he took off in a run toward Barbara's voice. The two of them emerged a minute later, grinning, shouldering two of the squirrel poles between them. From the poles hung the corpses of three red squirrels, swinging as they walked. One of them, Tracy saw in horror was still twitching and scrabbling. Barbara, cried out. Barbara, one's alive. Barbara nodded. Grab a rock, she said. Me? Tracy said. Yes, you. Tracy looked around the campsite. She quickly spotted a solid looking one and held it up over her head for Barbara's inspection. Good, said Barbara. Now take off one of your socks and put the rock inside it. Tracy felt her stomach lurch. Do it, said Barbara. Come on, Tracy. If I have to put the pole down, he'll get away. Something in Barbara's gaze told Tracy that this was a test, that to fail it would be catastrophic for their friendship. And so she complied, sitting down on the earth, removing a shoe and then a sock, putting the rock inside it. With one bare foot, she hobbled toward the frantic squirrel. The rest of the campers were quiet. She aimed her weapon, swung it like a bat toward the skull of the red squirrel until it no longer moved. Ugh. So they're going to eat the squirrel? They've been camping for what, a day? And they're already eating squirrel? You can't bring more food than that. Ugh. Raising her head at last, she saw that she was being watched, not just by her peers, but by TJ Hewitt up on her ridge, hands on hips, smiling down at her in approval. Good job, she called. These were the only words she had spoken since declaring herself invisible. Then, swiftly, she turned back on them and crouched down to return to her tent. Barbara was the one to butcher the squirrels, bending forward to work on a tarp on the ground. When she was nearly finished removing the pelt, she shifted a squirrel carcass onto her lap and began to work off the remaining skin with a paring knife. The rest of them watched. Later, no one would be certain quite how it happened, not even Barbara, but suddenly she was sitting very still, and on her right knee was the half-skinned squirrel, and inside her left thigh was the tip of the small knife she had been using. Her hand was still holding its hilt. Reflexively, she extracted it in one similarly swift motion and then said, I shouldn't have done that. Sure enough, the wound lay dormant for 3 seconds, as if hesitating, and then from it, a small pool of blood surfaced and then spilled. I shouldn't have taken it out, Barbara said again. I should have left it in there. Barbara had been wearing shorts, and so her leg was in full view. Rivulets of blood were spilling down the inside of her thigh, splashing onto the soil beneath her. Some of the other campers backed away, heads in hands. Others approached. We should tell TJ, said Lowell. No, said Barbara quickly. Why not? Said Walter. She said the only reason to get her was an emergency. It's not an emergency, said Barbara. I can handle it. She looked around. The blood dripping from her leg was making a pat-pat noise on the ground. Christopher, she called. He had run away at the first sight of blood. From his tent, now he emerged, timid. I need my sweatshirt back, said Barbara. I'm sorry. He stripped it off hastily, ran it to her. With her knife, she severed one sleeve and wrapped it firmly around her leg. The fabric of the sleeve went quickly from white to pink. For an hour or two, Barbara wore it, going about her business as before, seemingly unperturbed. They ate squirrel for dinner, each given approximately one bite of meat, which boosted everyone's morale, even if it did not lessen their hunger. By late evening, Tracy noticed that Barbara seemed quieter than usual. She had no doubt lost a lot of blood. The sweatshirt sleeve had needed replacement twice with other fabrics. Are you all right? Tracy said. I'm fine, said Barbara, but her face was very pale. Tracy looked at her one beat too long. What? Barbara said. Behind her, Tracy could feel the gazes of the other campers turning in their direction. The campsite was silent. We have to tell TJ, said Lowell. He looked down at Barbara, inspecting her face. I'm serious. You've lost too much blood. It's not safe. I'm fine, Barbara said again, weakly. But Lowell wouldn't hear it. He strode off in the direction of TJ's campsite. Barbara called after him once, but her voice was too quiet to be heard. Oh, thank you, Rob. Skunk? Hmm. 10 seconds later, TJ came running down the small incline between her campsite and theirs, carrying a large pot before her. She knelt down in front of Barbara, who was now unable to hold up her head any longer. After inspecting her charge, TJ popped up onto her feet and looked around, assessing everyone, then correctly identifying Lowell Cargill as the person most likely to be helpful in a crisis. She held out the pot in her hands, instructing him to stoke the campfire and then to boil water over it. She, meanwhile, scooped Barbara swiftly into her arms, then walked as quickly as she could back up the hill. Shout when the water's boiling, she called. Then she and Barbara disappeared inside her tent. By nightfall, Barbara was cleaned, sutured, fed, watered, clothed in warmer clothing, and much pinker in the face. She was also back with her peers at the campsite, already downplaying the severity of what had transpired. Later, in their tent, Tracy and Barbara huddled together as before. Oh, thank you, Leroy. Ah, yes. Is that coffee? Yeah. Barbara said, Tracy, what? I'm glad you're okay. Barbara scoffed. I would have been fine. I don't know, said Tracy. You didn't look good. I could have taken care of myself. I would have walked back to Camp Emerson if I'd gotten any worse. I would have walked all the way there and all the way back. No one needed to get TJ involved. Strangely, Tracy believed her. Where'd you learn all that stuff? Said Tracy. What stuff? Trapping and putting up tents and all, taking apart those squirrels, first aid. Same places as you, said Barbara. TJ's classes. Tracy shook her head. I don't know what you know. I don't think anyone does. Barbara was briefly quiet. My family, she said. They were quiet then. There was more to the story. Tracy could tell. She didn't press. Are you leaving again tonight? Said Tracy, whispering. I don't think I can, said Barbara. She shifted a little. I don't think my leg will let me. She sighed. Is it all right that you don't? Said Tracy. She said this carefully, not wanting to repeat her mistake to anger Barbara by pressing an issue she clearly did not want to talk about. Barbara was silent so long that Tracy assumed she had fallen asleep. The extra clothes she'd been given by TJ lent warmth to both of them, and Tracy felt herself growing sleepy as well. Then, in the dark, she heard Barbara exhale. Probably not, she said quietly. It's probably not all right. Huh. It's interesting. Makes me still think, what's his name? Because he's got the anger problem. John Paul McClellan. Okay, Alice, day 2. On the second day of Barbara's absence, Alice wakes, her mouth a desert. She slept all night on her stomach. A patch of wetness has spread outward onto the bedspread from her mouth. She knows something bad has happened. The feeling of it hovers. The fact of it hasn't arrived yet. She sits up, reaches for the tumbler of gin on her nightstand, drinks painfully. She stands. Barbara. There it is. Her daughter has been missing since yesterday morning. 5 minutes later, Alice stands in the sunroom. She watches from the window, more parents arriving to retrieve their children 1 week earlier than they planned. Some, those who live in Albany or Niskayuna or Vermont, came yesterday to retrieve their children. Others, the West Coasters, the Coloradans, those who had to catch a flight, are only arriving today, and they pull onto the preserve with urgency in their rented or hired cars, horrified that their children have had to spend an entire night in a place where another child went missing less than 24 hours earlier. She understands. She remembers feeling this way about Bear, that she would do anything to protect him, that she would physically harm anyone who dreamed of harming him. He needed her. That was the thing. He needed her when no one had ever needed her before. He clung to her, a habit that Peter pathologized, but she had never been anyone's protector before. And she enjoyed the feeling, indulging it in secret whenever they were alone. Oh, thank you, Malema. Yeah, Barbara dress. Behind her, someone enters the sunroom. Without turning, she knows who it is. She'll be taken to Albany today. She understands. The Peters are getting her out of the way, as usual. That's all right. She likes being in Albany. She can hear her son's voice better there. Okay. Next chapter is Alice, 1961. Think this is when Barbara was born. No. Bear's still there. Bear was bouncing with anticipation. Alice watched him through the sunroom glass. The day that the Black Fly goodbye was due to begin. He always stationed himself on the front lawn, eager for company to arrive. Now he was turning cartwheels and throwing a baseball cap in the air over and over again. He was singing a song Alice didn't know, something he must have picked up at school. It struck her as funny sometimes that he had a whole life outside the home that she didn't know about. He's become such a person lately, she said to Peter, and Peter rolled his eyes as if he didn't know what she meant, but he did. She knew he did. At age 8, he was delightful, intelligent, curious, funny, and increasingly independent. It went beyond what she had hoped for. Now she sometimes missed him, his constant presence next to her, his high, clear voice calling Mama 18 times in a minute. But Peter was thrilled. It was all that he hoped for the boy. Self-reliance. And one of the best parts of all was the way it had brought Peter and Alice together. Now they could sit still together, watching their son like a show. They began to enjoy one another's company in a way they hadn't before. She was older, for one thing. Alice was 26 that year, a respectable age at last. At times now, she had the thrilling idea that her husband was falling in love with her for the first time, actually. She was sad for the younger Alice, the 18-year-old, who hadn't known anything about the world, but she was happy for herself in this moment. It was funny, she thought, how many relationships one could have with the same man over the course of a lifetime together. Peter and his father had invited more guests than ever to that year's event, 37 by Alice's count. Every bedroom was assigned, and every room in every outbuilding as well. Due to the number of single men and women who could not share a room, they had even had to commandeer some of the staff quarters. For the staff members they displaced, they rented 2 unoccupied summer homes 5 miles to the south and provided them with cars. The first guest pulled in, and Bear ran toward the driveway to say hello. Alice, from her place in the sunroom, recognized the car immediately as his sister Delphine. It had been 3 years since George's death. Do you mind? I'm not going to dig a hole in the bed. And Delphine had continued to come alone for that time, always arriving in the same practical Buick that she staunchly refused to sell. There, said Delphine. Through the glass, Alice could see the word as her mouth formed it. She and the boy had always had a special bond, a nice friendship. At each summer party, she had treated him as an equal, brought paper and paint for him, sat with him for hours, talking with him about what he was learning in school. Alice walked into the hallway, into the main room where Peter and his parents were reading by the central fireplace. Delphine is here, she said. Oh, thank you, Jerry. The crowd that year was eclectic. The usual suspects were there, the families of Peter and Alice, the Southworths who would bring their toddler daughter Annabel, the McClellans and their children, and also a handful of clients and their obligatory artists. Everyone complimented the food. Everyone complimented everything, actually. The decorations and the flowers and the musicians they had brought in, and the outfits that Alice wore, and Bear's intelligence and good humor, and his handsomeness, too. Throughout the week, Peter seemed different to Alice, his best self. He was happier, more enthusiastic, relaxed even. At times, she found him sitting on the lawn reading a paper. Other years, he had seemed not to sit down at all. One day, when most of the guests had gone for a hike up Hunt Mountain, Alice stayed behind. She was tired from a late night. She would take a short nap, she thought. She went to her bedroom and stopped short. Peter was there in her bed, awake. He looked up at her, surprised at first. Then he smiled. No hike, he said. No, said Alice. I thought I'd rest for a bit. She waited, slightly nervous. The word rest was anathema to Peter. He didn't enjoy resting himself and didn't appreciate it when anyone around him did either. But he surprised her. Come rest with me, he said. No, thank you, Jerry. In the first year of their marriage, sex had been something requisite. There was always a mild embarrassment about it on both their parts. From their first moments alone together, she had never truly felt his desire, but something more akin to duty or a sort of condescending charity. When Bear turned 1, Peter had rooms furnished for her that were separate from his. In both their Albany house and at Self Reliance, he didn't include her in this decision, merely presented both rooms to her, saying his insomnia required it. Since then, she had slept alone. Alice, still a young woman, sometimes felt desire so strongly that she did not know what to do with it. She lusted after friends, after strangers in the street, but after a handful of rejections from Peter, so brutal that they left her crying, she stopped making any attempt to engage him in that way, attended to herself instead, wondering if any other woman on the planet did what she was doing. That day, though, Peter reached for her with a tenderness she had never felt before. He was gentle and forceful all at once. She lay in bed with him afterward, astonished. She cried, something she rarely let herself do in front of Peter. What is it? He asked her kindly. She was crying, she said, because she loved him, and she did. In that moment, she loved him and the life they had built together, but she was also crying because of all that she'd been deprived of to that point. Silly, he called her, yet there was affection in his voice, and she let herself sink into him. This, she thought, was what she had been wanting her whole life. At last, it was here. Everything was different for the rest of the week. The two of them mooned after one another every moment they could. They sought one another out. Peter slept in her room, the one he had made for her. He went to his on the other side of the hallway, only to change and dress in the morning. Even Bear noticed. He came to them once, taking both of their hands in his, grinning as he looked into their faces, as if he could sense their love. Usually, the Black Flag goodbye took place from a Saturday to a Saturday. That year, at their annual farewell dinner, a clam bake put on by the staff in the traditional manner on the beach, Peter stood up and called for everyone's attention. "Don't leave tomorrow," he said. "Stay an extra day." He looked around then, as if only just realizing the implications of his idea. "Warren," he called, the name of the cook in those days. "Warren, we have enough food for tomorrow, haven't we?" Hesitantly, Warren nodded. It would mean more trips to town, Alice knew. It would mean a change in plans for all the temporary staff who had initially been contracted to work just the week. But Peter had already made his decision. The guests had already cheered. The dinner looked set to proceed until someone on the periphery spoke up. "Is that all right?" said Delphine. Everyone turned in her direction. "Warren, did you have other plans?" Silence. The impropriety of this exchange was obvious to everyone on the beach. What right did Delphine, a widowed woman alone at the party, have to directly address a member of the Van Layer staff? Suddenly, Peter's father, who generally let his son run the show, stood up from the deep Adirondack chair he'd been sitting in with a spryness that would have been surprising in any other man of his age. He addressed the group as a whole. "Warren will be happy to accommodate you all," he said, "as will we. Thank you for your concerns, Miss Barlow." In bed that night, Peter's good mood was gone. A quiet fury had replaced it. What was she thinking, he said, over and over. She, Alice presumed, was Delphine. "She means well," said Alice. She's always been different, ever since we were children." Peter was silent. "She has good qualities, too. She's very good with Bear," said Alice, thinking frantically of anything she could say to mollify her husband. "She has always been kind to him. She sits with him, you know. She brings him toys every time she comes." "The presumptuousness of that woman," said Peter. "I know she's your sister, Alice, but I'm not certain we can keep inviting her." He turned over, away from Alice. Tentatively, she put a hand on his shoulder. He shrugged it off. Then he stood up. He put on his robe. He walked out of her room, across the hallway, and into his. She didn't want the spell of the week to be over. She didn't want to go back to the way they'd always been. She hadn't had as much to drink that week as she normally did. She'd been happily distracted by Peter's attention, but the final Saturday of the Black Flag goodbye, when she realized Peter would not be coming out of his room, she took a glass of wine at lunch and continued to refill it in the kitchen whenever she had a moment to herself. By 4 o'clock, the smell of the air had changed. Rain was coming, everyone said. The staff had been busy all day, bringing bags of groceries back from town. At some point, somebody proposed an outing on Lake Joan. It would be their last chance to boat before the storm, and so the decision was made, and everyone retreated to their rooms to change. Bear would enjoy that, thought Alice, and she set off to find him. For most of the week, he'd been running here and there with John Paul and Marnie McClellan. She could go long stretches without seeing him. She never paid so little attention to him as she did that week. She never had anything to distract her the way that Peter had. It was all right, she told herself. Bear, too, was having fun. Tessie Jo Hewitt was part of their group as well, slightly older than the rest. She seemed to be their leader. Alice wasn't certain, but she thought it possible that Vic Hewitt had assigned his daughter the task of acting as babysitter for the other children. Alice didn't find Bear in his room or in any of the McClellans' rooms. She looked down at the beach and in the boathouse where two of the staff were readying several watercraft for that afternoon's excursion. Have you seen Bear? She asked them, but they hadn't. She saved Peter's room for last. For one thing, she thought it unlikely that her son was there. Bear and his father had become closer lately, but really he was hers alone. Peter seemed always to look at him from a distance, even when they were in the same room. She walked down the carpeted hallway of self-reliance, listening for children's voices, for the voice of her son. She stood outside Peter's room, her ear to the door, and then, hearing nothing, she turned the knob. Juditha, day 2. See, that chapter's making me think, does Delphine have motive? Inside the now abandoned slaughterhouse, Judy stands silent. Oh, yeah, the slaughterhouse. She listens, more footsteps, 5, 6, 7 in a row. Toward the back of the shadowy room, she sees a staircase leading upward into darkness. If she were in a movie, she thinks she'd heard in that direction, but all of her training tells her not to go solo toward a potential threat. And so instead, she backs out of the structure. In the daylight, headed in the direction of Camp Emerson, she breaks into a jog. 15 minutes later, Judy stands next to Denny Hayes and Captain La Rochelle on the dirt driveway. Across from them, a squadron of 6 state troopers, guns drawn, backs to walls, enters the structure 2 by 2. This feels unnecessary, whispers Judy. And Denny turns and shushes her. Captain's orders, he says. When the last of the troopers had disappeared out of sight, Judy feels the weight of what she's done. For 3 long minutes, she looks up at the sky, down at the ground. How many footsteps did she actually hear? Just a few, she thinks. And were they loud? Not particularly. Could they have been something else? A tree tapping on the roof? Acorns falling? Dozens of possibilities occur to her until, at last, the troopers file out of the slaughterhouse. Relaxed now. The 2 at the front cross the dirt road to talk to Captain La Rochelle. Found the culprit, says one. Family of squirrels, says the other, grinning. La Rochelle clears his throat. That's it? Huh? You sure? Yeah, we searched the whole upstairs. La Rochelle says nothing. Then, not looking at Judy, he turns to Hayes. I was interrupted during a conversation with Mr. Van Laer, says La Rochelle. So I think it's best I return to him now. He strides off. Juditha, day 2. Back at the command post, in the director's cabin, Denny Hayes positions himself at the front of the room, preparing to pick up where he left off with the small group of investigators gathered before him. The superintendent, he says, is not happy with their efforts so far. The Adirondack Search and Rescue Team, a crew of civilian volunteers, is being dispatched to do a Type 3 search today in the surrounding woods after NCON's failure to locate anyone or anything yesterday. Any leads from this morning, Hayes asked. The other investigators glance around. The looks on their faces are clear, not much. One says, couple kids said they've seen a woman in the woods in the past, this summer and other summers too. Apparently, she's a local legend, ghost story type of thing. Hayes blinks. Ghost story about a woman. Noted, says Hayes. Anyone able to tell us more about what this ghost looks like? The same investigator says, older woman, thin, gray hair, that's all I got, aside from what they call her, which is the investigator, chagrined, makes a display of inspecting his notes, reads it off. Scary Mary. Scary Mary, says Hayes. The investigator nods. Anyone else, says Hayes. Silence. Everyone says Barbara was well liked, says another investigator. No quarrels with anyone that I've heard about. Hayes looks more despairing than ever, still feeling humiliated from her earlier mistake at the slaughterhouse. Judy weighs whether to produce in this moment the information provided by Miss Clute, the cook. Already she imagines she's being talked about on the grounds, being called incompetent. She'd prefer to tell Denny Hayes in private, but Hayes looks poised to break up the meeting, and so she raises her hand. Put your hand down, Judy, says Hayes. You're an investigator, not a student. Go ahead. She flashes. There's a cook up at the house who had something to tell me, she begins. Turns out she's the daughter of the man said to have abducted Bear Van Laer. For a beat, no one says anything. Then an investigator who hasn't spoken yet says, Carl Stoddard? Judy nods. She recognizes him. He's the oldest investigator in the room, the one who yesterday asked La Rochelle whether Jacob Sluter was under consideration for Barbara's disappearance. I worked that case, the man says, confirming what everyone assumed. Judy makes a note to talk to him whenever she can get him alone. Why on earth, says Hayes, would Carl Stoddard's daughter be working for the Van Laers? What doesn't make sense in either direction. They wouldn't want her here, that's certain, and she probably wouldn't want to be here either. She uses her married name, says Judy, Clute. She said that the Van Laers don't know who she is. Said she took the job out of necessity after her husband lost his. They've got a lot of kids, another on the way. And what did she have to say about Barbara's disappearance? Judy thinks about how to phrase this. She said Barbara's family never treated Barbara well, neglected her, sort of, where she might have gone. Asked Hayes. Not that she's mentioned. I guess she might not have known everything. This is her summer she's been here. And what does she have to say about her own father? The room feels as if it's holding its breath. She said Carl Stoddard was framed, says Judy. Said there's no way he did it. But he died of a heart attack before he could be exonerated. And the Van Laer family just sort of let it be assumed that he was the one responsible based on only a few pieces of evidence. She pauses. I guess Captain La Rochelle agreed, and that's the story that was presented to the public, too. Quiet. Judy glances at the investigator who worked the original case. Goldman, says Hayes, and the investigator turns. What do you think? Goldman thinks. He glances over his shoulder, looking for La Rochelle. I never liked Stoddard for it, he says, but don't ask me that in front of the captain. Did Miss Clute sign a statement? Asked Hayes, turning to Judy. Will she go on record? No, says Judy quickly. She practically ran away when I asked her. Still, says Hayes, thank you, Investigator Leptak. That's the most interesting thing I've heard today. She must have trusted you to tell you that. He holds her gaze. Then, anything else? Anyone? The door swings open suddenly. In walks Captain La Rochelle. Immediately, the mood in the room changes. Goldman busies himself with files. Two of the other investigators head outside, and Judy realizes that all of them have made a silent decision. They won't say anything in front of La Rochelle again, not without telling Hayes privately first. Captain La Rochelle doesn't ask any questions about what's transpired since he's been gone. Judita, day 2. The Adirondack Search and Rescue Team, La Rochelle announces, has found something up by the observer's tower at the top of Hunt Mountain. Inside and outside the nearby cabin, a huge number of beer bottles have been collected, and from these, usable fingerprints have been taken, and from these, 5 have been matched with John Paul McClellan, but there's more. Someone called an anonymous tip into the station at Raybrook. Apparently, John Paul McClellan was known to be staying in the vicinity of the Van Laer Preserve, not just for the week-long celebration at the house, but for the whole summer, making it probable that the boyfriend Barbara Van Laer was going to see in the observer's cabin each night was indeed McClellan. So that's it, says Goldman. Between that and the bloody uniform, McClellan's our guy. There's a hitch, says La Rochelle, because McClellan and his lawyer father have made a separate allegation. It was Louise Donadieu, Barbara's counselor, who asked McClellan to dispose of the bag, the contents of which, as La Rochelle, are currently being analyzed for a blood type by forensics. So we're pointing at McClellan, says Goldman, and McClellan's pointing at Donadieu. And a kid named Lee Towson, says La Rochelle. Kitchen worker McClellan says he and Donadieu were a pair. Around the room, a clearing of throats. Anyway, says La Rochelle, until we get the blood analysis back, let's just keep following the leads we have. Around the command post, investigators stand. La Rochelle leaves to return to the main house. Slowly, the room clears. When it's empty, Denny Hayes turns to Judy. Let me see that map, he says. Judy retrieves the pad of paper from the wall she's leaned it against. Hayes takes it, inspects the several pages she's drawn on, the house, the camp, the outbuildings, names above the buildings she was able to populate. Hayes asks for a pen, writes unoccupied above the farm buildings. Judy's face reddens. For a long while, he says nothing. Then he points to a northern spot on one of the maps. Let's add the observer's cabin here, he says. We can add McClellan's name to it. Why wouldn't Louise Donadieu have known McClellan was on the grounds all summer, says Judy. Weren't they together? No idea, says Hayes. Maybe he lied to her. Where does she think he was? Asks Judy. I'm not sure, he says, but we can find out. She's still in Wells until they remand her to Albion. I'll stop in. Judy nods. What about McClellan himself? She says. Do you have tabs on him? Hayes confirms that they do. One investigator from every shift has been assigned to sit in the parking lot of the hotel he's staying in, keeping a lookout for him and his parents. The problem is, says Hayes, no matter how much evidence we stack up, without a body or the living girl, he's unarrestable. All we have him on are fairly minor charges. A DUI, possession, with a lawyer father, that's not going to keep him in our sights for long. But the uniform, says Judy, still maintaining the Donadieu girl asked him to dispose of the bag that held it. At nearly 7 p.m., exhausted, Judy finally walks to her car. She points her Beetle down the long dirt driveway of Self-Reliance, then left onto State Road 29, heading south. Now that Judy is alone, there's nothing to distract her from her earlier humiliation, and she presses her eyes close against it, briefly says, "God damn it," several times. All those state troopers, Captain La Rochelle himself, Hayes, all of them watching her, skeptical, laughing even. If she had just walked up those stairs, she thinks, if she had just listened longer. Her eyes are heavy. It's been a long day in the heat. When she was promoted to investigator, she hadn't realized how much more human interaction she'd be tasked with. As a trooper, she'd enjoyed the long stretches of solitude that came with sitting at the edge of the highway, waiting. She turns up the radio as loud as she can take it. Van McCoy commands her to hustle. Sleepily, she tries to comply. Judy wakes up with a jolt. It's full dark. She's still on Route 29. Her hands are in her lap. The car is turned off. She's still alive, but apparently she pulled to the side of the road and fell asleep without having any memory of doing so, without locking her doors. A sudden rush of adrenaline and fear. Imagine, thinks Judy, imagine if she hadn't pulled over. Wide awake now, Judy puts her blinker on, checks her blind spot, and pulls back onto the road. Ahead of her, she notices a sign, Shattuck Township, 6 miles. Beneath it, 2 small icons, food and lodging. Judy makes a right at the foot of the off-ramp. After a minute, she spies a tiny roadside motel, neon sign outside it, in-ground pool nearby. The woman at the front desk is reading a novel. She looks up when Judy enters. "I was wondering if there might be a room available," says Judy. The woman nods. Judy feels self-conscious. Suddenly, she isn't sure how often single women check into motels around here, but she imagines the ones who do are a certain type. So she volunteers unasked. "I'm a police officer, an investigator. I'm working on a case nearby." "Okay," says the woman, but she looks slightly more interested than she did before. "Are there phones?" Judy asks. "There are," says the woman, "but the ones in the rooms only connect to the front desk. If you want to call out, you got to use the payphone over there," and she points. Her mother answers. "Judita," she says, without waiting. "Hi, Ma. Judita, I've been worried sick." "Please tell me you're all right." The sound of her own name in her mother's voice. Her mother, who came over at 15, who worked so hard to drop any trace of an accent, who refused to speak Polish to her children, who despite all of this still bears the weight of strangers clocking her as foreign, suddenly makes Judy want to cry. "I'm all right, Mama. I'm just tired. Long day today." She can hear her father in the background asking, "What time will she be home?" "Ma," says Judy, "I know Daddy won't like this, but I have to move out. I can't live at home anymore, not with this job." Silence. "Where are you now?" "I'm at a motel. It's called," Judy checks the sign above the counter, "the Alcott Family Inn. It's close to the case I'm working." "At a what?" says her mother. "Judita Luptak, did you just say you're at a—" "Don't tell Dad," says Judy, "please." In the background, "Where is she? At a what?" Her mother sighs lengthily. Then she says, "She's at a friend's house, Marty. Someone who lives closer to the case she's working." A pause. "What friend of hers lives all the way up there?" "Honey," says her mother, "just be safe, all right?" "I will be, Ma," says Judy. The room is perfectly adequate. Flowered bedspread, flowered curtains, framed pictures of flowers on the wall. She collapses into bed without taking her clothes off. Judita, day 3. She wakes up to the sound of knocking on the door. She wakes slowly, trying to remember where she is. Then she grabs the clock on her nightstand, terrified that she has overslept. It's only 6 a.m. Judy is relieved and annoyed. She stands, still wearing her suit, now rumpled, and goes to the door. Through the peephole, she sees a middle-aged man, his hair combed into a neat side part. He wears a short-sleeved shirt dress, tan, and a brown tie. He holds an umbrella above his head. She looks past him into the parking lot beyond the covered walkway outside all the rooms and sees that it's pouring. Bad for the search, she thinks automatically. She opens the door, keeping the chain lock on. Hello, says the man. Are you Miss Luptak? Yes. My name is Bob Alcott, says the man. Can I trouble you for a second? From behind the cracked, chain locked door, she nods. He glances over his shoulder into the downpour soaking the parking lot. I wonder, do you mind if I come in? I do mind. He pauses, explains he's the husband of the woman working the desk. He says, and a co-owner of the Alcott Family Inn. He's also a history teacher at the nearby central school. Beatrice said you were a detective, he says, and that you're working a case nearby. She nods. Is it the Van Layer girl? He asks her. She keeps her face still. It's all right, he says. You don't have to answer, but if you are, I've got something to tell you. I'm listening, says Judy. It's about her brother, says Bob Alcott. Bear. Louise, day 3. Louise in Wells awaits her transfer. She'll be sent to Albion, hours to the west, near Rochester, farther away, in fact, than Louise has ever traveled. She can't see the rain outside, but she can hear it. She closes her eyes, imagines Barbara in the woods, pictures her alive, then dead, wills herself back to the cabin called Balsam the night before Barbara Van Laer went missing. Pictures falling asleep in her little cot there, the faint lapping of Lake Joan in the near distance, the cool, sharp air of evening. Camp Emerson, she realizes with a twinge of sadness, is the place she has felt the most at home in her life. She wishes Jessie could go there. Just one summer, she wishes she could go. Donahue, says a voice, and Louise gets to her feet, ready for her transfer. Instead, the officer unlocks the cell door. Somebody posted bail for you, he says. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Oh, Stella doll. Stella. Oh, welcome, IBS, Earth Canvas Ops. Canvas Ops. Sorry. Being distracted at work. Oh, thank you, Rob. Yeah, I can't tell. Is that a hospital? I don't know what that is. But thank you. Tracy, day 3. Back in her father's rental in Saratoga Springs, Tracy Jewell stands in the living room, a book in her hands. She is alone for the first time in 3 days. Her father and Donna Romano having finally gone back to the track. Oh, okay. Now she lowers the blinds halfway and opens the windows halfway and points all the fans in the house in her direction. The pleasant smell of new rain comes in. She prepares an elaborate snack for herself, places it on the floor beside her. 2 months ago, before she had ever heard of the Van Laer Preserve or Camp Emerson, this was the way she anticipated spending her summer. Today, it feels like a letdown. For an hour, her book goes unread. She is thinking of Barbara Van Laer, running through every exchange they had, racking her brain for evidence that might help to bring her home. There is one memory she returns to over and over. In early August, just after their return from survival trip, the week before Barbara went missing, Tracy and Barbara had been walking back from a woodsmanship class to begin their free hour when Barbara had an idea. Follow me, she said. Where? But Barbara only grinned and veered east toward the beach. The day was one of the most beautiful of the entire session. Barbara didn't stop at the beach, but swerved northward toward the woods that bordered the beach, passing the boathouse along the way. The sun came through the pines in golden shafts, casting spotlights here and there across the ground. At a certain point, Tracy understood where they were going. Under normal circumstances, she would have felt afraid. She was typically a follower of rules, but at Camp Emerson, under the influence of Barbara, she had begun to feel reckless. At the conclusion of their brief, silent hike, they were facing a parking area full of cars. Beyond it, the southern wing of Self Reliance, a side door was propped slightly open. Through it strode a maid in uniform, wheeling a cart of laundry around a corner out of sight. It took Tracy a moment to notice movement on the lawn that sloped down to the lake, but a handful of voices drew her eye in that direction. A large number of people sat on chairs and chase lounges. They held glasses in their hands, and their voices were loud and merry. This, Tracy realized, was the 100th anniversary party that Barbara had mentioned. Tracy withdrew immediately behind a tree. Barbara, she whispered. Relax, said Barbara. It's happy hour. They're definitely sloshed. She strode forward, turning only when she realized Tracy hadn't followed. Come on, she said. The only people we have to watch out for are my parents, and they won't tell even if they do see us. They entered the house through the open side door. Along the hallway were two rows of doors. In the ones left open, she could see made beds, framed paintings, animal skins, and mounted heads. Every so often, she took several running steps to keep up with Barbara, who was walking with intention toward what Tracy thought would be her room. But instead, she led them into an enormous kitchen. She opened the refrigerator and brought out several good things to eat. Then, setting it all before them on a nearby counter, she commenced. Dig in, said Barbara. Are you hungry? I'm always starving. Tracy followed suit more cautiously. She had never before seen a girl eat with the abandon of Barbara Van Laer, who shoved food into her mouth with an open palm. She chewed loudly and swallowed vigorously. Tracy watched, fascinated. When Barbara had taken her fill, she left everything out on the counter. They won't know it was us, she said, and then retraced her steps down the same hallway through which they had entered. Suddenly, there came two voices, male and female. Unswervingly, Barbara opened a door on their right and pushed Tracy into a small broom closet. It was so small that there was only room for one. Stay cool, said Barbara, closing the door behind her. Through the crack beneath the door, Tracy could see her shadow move away, and then the sound of a door hinge creaking softly someplace down the hall. Barbara taking shelter elsewhere, she supposed. Tracy breathed as quickly as she could. She was terrified of being caught. Oh, thank you, Malemo. You're amazing. Oh, thank you. Being punished. If the start of camp she had wanted to be sent home, well, that feeling was gone now, replaced by a firm desire to remain at Camp Emerson for the duration of the session, to learn everything she could learn from Barbara Van Laer. The footsteps that accompanied the voices were growing louder. She held her breath, listening. Had they gone? She waited 30 seconds longer. Then, just as Tracy searched fumblingly for a doorknob in the dark, she heard one name uttered by the woman, Peter. In her voice, Tracy heard what she assumed must be desire. More noises, inscrutable to Tracy, and then the quick continued patter of those footsteps, one perhaps chasing after the other, and then true silence for some time. She jumped when the door swung open. Bright daylight made her squint. There was Barbara standing before her, gesturing with her head in the direction of the side door. She was holding a paper bag in her hands. She looked enraged. What happened? Tracy mouthed, but Barbara only shook her head furiously and strode off. Tracy followed her silently, glancing left and right, gulping the house with her eyes. She wanted to see Barbara's room. She wanted to see the rest of the house. She wanted to know more about what she had heard, those whispering voices. But Tracy's curiosity about all those things was overruled by her discretion. She understood instinctively that Barbara would not appreciate questions along these lines, and so she said nothing even after they'd reached the woods. Tracy panted as she walked. At a certain point, right before they reached the beach, Barbara finally stopped and turned. They painted my room, she said. Those motherfuckers painted my room. The words felt like a slap. Tracy had read it, but she never heard it spoken. I'm sorry, she said, though she didn't fully understand. All that work, said Barbara, all that work. She sank down into a squat, put her face in her hands. Slowly, Tracy lowered herself as well. What work? She said, after so much time had passed that her knees had begun to throb. But Barbara only continued with her rant. That's probably why they let me come to camp, said Barbara, so they could get in there and paint it over without my permission. She stood up and set off abruptly. Pink, she said. They painted my room pink. Why do you think they did it? Tracy asked. She was once again running a little to keep up with her. Oh, for their guests, said Barbara, for the party. Good for God forbid someone witness any creativity in that house. She spun around again. The bag she was holding in her hands had become a weapon, swinging at the end of her arm like a bludgeon. The funny part is, said Barbara, they invited all these artists and writers and actors, but they're the entertainment, the decoration. No one takes them seriously. They reached Balsam moments before the end of free hour. Louise and Annabelle were waiting to lead them to the commissary for dinner. So grateful was Tracy not to have been caught that it took her several hours to remember something. After lights out, she lay in her bunk, growing more and more curious, until finally she couldn't stop herself. She leaned her head over the side of the bunk. Barbara, she whispered, what did you bring back in that bag? And then came a little pause, and then, what bag? Whispered Barbara in the dark. Louise, day 3. Louise, freshly bailed out of jail, once again finds herself in a car with Denny Hayes. In the front seat this time, though she has tried to persuade Hayes otherwise, he's driving in the direction of her mother's house. One of the conditions of her pretrial release is that she will remain at one known address and adhere to a 6 o'clock curfew. The only address Louise could provide upon being taken into custody was her mother's. Now they ride in silence toward that house. Abruptly, Louise says, do you know who bailed me out? Denny looks surprised. Don't you? No. All I heard was a lady did it. That's what the trooper told me. Your mom? Denny asks. I guess so. She doesn't want to let herself be hopeful. She barely seen her mother outside the house for several years. She's never known her mother to have more than $5 in her billfold at one time. You've changed a lot since you were a kid, says Denny. She tenses. To her, it feels like the opening of a come-on. Alone in a car with any man, she feels threat in her body. But he continues, reassuring her, you were such a happy little thing. Always had the sunniest smile on your face when I came around. They're approaching the crest of a hill that's familiar to Louise from all of her trips home. The small center of Shattuck comes into sight briefly and then disappears once more. You remember when I took the two of you to Storytown? Louise is startled. You must have been 6 years old, he says. Thereabouts, I picked you and your mother up, and We drove down to Lake George together. Your mother was quiet, but you were so happy you were jumping up and down. Bought you an ice cream and it fell off its cone. Bought you another one straight away. Couldn't stand the look on your face. Sharp tears come to Louise's eyes, and she wills them to be gone. Why, she wonders, is she crying? And the answer comes to her. It's the idea that anyone in the world ever took care of her. Louise, rather than the other way around. She does remember that day, though. She didn't know it was Denny Hayes. In her memory, it was just another one of her mother's boyfriends, someone whose name she avoided using because she didn't want to mix it up with anyone else's. Of all the men who'd ever come around to see her mother, that was one of the only one who ever did anything nice for her without demanding a favor in return. Out front of her mother's place, Louise regards the house alongside Denny Hayes. Two of its shutters are missing altogether. Another one is hanging at an angle. So much mail has piled up in the mailbox that a stack of waterlogged envelopes now sits on the ground beneath it. The postmen have given up. She'd have a talk with Jesse about taking responsibility for that. At least he should be bringing in the mail. Looks just the same, says Denny charitably. Thanks for the ride, Louise says, and gets out of the car. She hopes he'll leave, but he too exits, stands, adjusts his shirt and pants. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Louise rattles her key loudly in the lock, letting anyone inside know she's about to enter. She hopes Jesse isn't smoking anything upstairs. Her first sniff of the kitchen tells her he isn't. Mom, she calls out. Mom, I got some company here. A pause. Who is it? Her mother's voice is creaky with disuse. Denny Hayes, calls Louise. She waits. She can very easily imagine her mother saying, Who? It's been years, and the years have been hard. Just a minute, her mother calls instead, and Louise hears her ascending the staircase slowly. Is Jessie home? Louise calls, but there's no answer. When her mother comes down again, she's fully dressed. She's wearing makeup for the first time in years. Shameless, Louise thinks, but secretly she is reassured to find her mother still capable of making this effort. Denny's face changes upon seeing her, softens. Well, hi, Carol, he says to her. Been a long time, hasn't it? The sound of her mother's Christian name awakens something hurt inside Louise. She hasn't heard the word said aloud much in recent years. Louise's mother looks back and forth from Louise to Denny. You're a cop now, Denny. I was a cop back when I knew you, says Denny. Don't you remember? A state trooper. She thinks, I guess I do remember that. I'm a senior investigator now, says Denny. I got promoted and then promoted again. Well, congratulations, says Louise's mother. Then realizing something, what's my daughter done? Louise tenses. I thought, says Louise, but she stops herself. She blinks rapidly, willing unexpected tears back into her skull. After all these years, she thinks, how could she have let herself hope that her mother would come through with bail? Denny, says her mother. Denny glances at her. Well, he says, I guess I'll let Louise tell you about that, being that she's over 18. Her mother is still sharp-eyed. She looks more sober than Louise has seen her lately. Whether this is intentional or a coincidence of timing, Louise isn't certain. Carol, says Denny, would you mind if I had a few words with Louise in private? I guess that'd be all right. Her mother retreats to the other room. Alone together, Louise and Denny face off. Louise, says Denny, I gotta ask you two things before I go. She waits. You know I'm an old friend, he says, and I hope you can trust me to do the right thing. I don't think you're guilty of anything to do with Barbara Van Laer, and I want to help you get out of the mess you're in. Do you believe me? She keeps her head still. She does and does not trust this man. Unbothered, Denny proceeds. First question, where did John Paul McClellan tell you he was staying this summer? All over the place, says Louise. He was visiting friends. He wanted to spend the year traveling before going to law school. Denny nods. What if I told you instead that for a large part of this summer, he was most likely staying right at the top of Hunt Mountain? It takes Louise a moment to process the information. I'd believe anything about him now, she says. Denny nods, sympathetic. What's your other question? Louise asks. How well did you know Lee Towson? Louise flushes. The name alone brings desire to her body. Not well, she says. Were you together? No. You have any idea where he might have gone? No, she says. In fact, she's been wondering this too. You're sure? Why? Well, says Denny, normally I'd keep this to myself, but because you're an old friend, I'll tell you. Louise waits. Apparently, he says, Barbara was sneaking out of the cabin every night to meet someone she called a boyfriend. You know something about that? She shakes her head. Truthfully, she doesn't. There's more, says Denny. Did you know that Lee Towson was incarcerated once? She'd heard a rumor about that. It's one of the many things that have been said about Lee at Camp Emerson. It's only added to his allure. Hesitantly, she nods. You know what it was for? Dealing grass, she says. Statutory rape, says Denny Hayes. She freezes. She doesn't know what statutory means. As if reading her mind or expression, Denny continues. Intercourse with a girl 16 years of age or younger. Louise says nothing. So you're sure you don't know where he is? I'm sure, says Louise. Well, if you think of anything else, here's my card. She takes it into her hands. I guess I'd better head out, he says. She pictures him going home to his family, his wife and children. She feels suddenly jealous. If she had had a father like Denny Hayes, or a mother, hell, she might have made something more of herself. Anything else you wanted to ask me or tell me, says Denny. Yeah, says Louise. If you find out who it was that bailed me out, will you let me know? I will, says Denny Hayes. Yeah, I'm curious too. Who would have? Well, I don't know how much the bail was, so who has the money, right? Tracy, August 1975. The evening of the final dance, the girls of Balsam got ready together in an elaborate ritual that served as the culmination of all the grooming skills they taught one another over the course of the months they'd been combined. Buckets of water were brought out to the porch. Legs were shaved, outfits were selected from among the several each camper had brought for occasions like this one. Finally, makeup was applied with precision by the undisputed master, Barbara Van Laer herself. Louise and Annabelle, who'd been getting ready in their small separate room, emerged and gasped loudly when they saw their charges. How grown up they all looked, how different from the start of the summer. Tracy understood. They were different. It was true. They'd grown a year or two in months. They'd formed an alliance. In the great hall, Tracy danced with everyone in Balsam and everyone who'd been on her survival trip, and most of all with Barbara Mitchell, the swim instructor, had brought in 3 friends from Schenectady, and together they served as a mediocre band. Lowell Cargill was someplace in the room. She knew, but it wasn't until Mitchell and his friends played I Honestly Love You that the frenzy in the community room slowed and then stopped. And Tracy became aware suddenly that the people around her were pairing off. Even Barbara, who had so far been her constant companion, had been asked to dance by someone else, a boy named Crandall, who was widely considered to be, aside from Lowell, the single or the most sought out after male camper at Camp Emerson. Suddenly alone in the middle of the dance floor, Tracy panicked, and then quickly she ran to the periphery and stood by the food table. She didn't actually see Lowell any place. Perhaps he had gone outside for fresh air. I hate slow songs, someone said next to her. She turned her head. There, next to her, was someone she recognized as a kitchen worker, a good-looking 20-something man she'd seen walking from time to time with her counselor, Louise. Lee, his name was. Me too, said Tracy. They're so embarrassing, said Lee. 1 minute you're out there having fun with your friends, and then the band decides to make things difficult for everyone by slowing it down. It's sadistic, actually. Tracy wasn't certain she knew what sadistic meant, but she nodded anyway. I gotta get back to the kitchen, said Lee. You look great, by the way. Cool dress. Thank you, said Tracy, and then he was gone. It was only after he left that she saw Lowell across the room wearing the type of absurd broad collared polyester suit that the boys brought for dances, and that still, despite everything, made her heart speed up. He stood still as a statue against the opposite wall. He was looking at a couple at the center of the room, Barbara Van Laer and her partner, and on his face was an expression of pain. Outside, that's where she wanted to go. Out to the fresh pine and the soil and the smell of the lake, out to the light of the moon on water. When no one was looking, she seized her moment and left. She walked into the dark. There were surprisingly few lights across the ground of Camp Emerson at night. Suddenly, in the dim night, there was movement, someone walking across her path, someone she recognized. Annabelle, their CIT, dressed in her clothes for the dance, was heading north. There was nothing up there, thought Tracy, except the main house, Barbara's house. Annabelle's parents were staying there this week. Tracy knew. Maybe that's why she was heading in that direction. Tracy, for a moment, considered calling out. Annabelle was supposed to escort them back to Balsam at the end of the dance, but the determination in her stride gave Tracy pause. Better not to say anything. And then her own name was called, interrupting her thoughts. She turned, walked in the direction of the voice that was repeating her name. On the beach, in the moonlight, she saw Lowell's best friend, Walter. He was sitting on the sand, looking dejected. She sat down next to him, lowering herself toward the earth. Until that summer, she had never felt at home in the house of her body, never felt graceful like Barbara, like the Melissas, like Lowell Cargill. You too, said little Walter. His arms were around his knees, his chin on his arms. Me too, what? Said Tracy. Sad, says Walter. Oh, said Tracy. No, not really. I'm fine. Walter was silent. Are you? Said Tracy. He nodded. She could barely make it out, but she knew without asking why he was. You know, said Walter, he asked Barbara to the dance, but she said no. Tracy sat very still, letting his words settle over her. She had known ever since the survival trip that Lowell wasn't interested in her, whatever she might have thought before. It was Barbara whom he loved. Still, hearing it knocked the breath out of her all over again. He was torn up about it, Walter continued. When she said no, people like Lowell aren't used to being rejected. He wasn't trying to be cruel. Tracy was certain of this. Most likely, he assumed that Barbara would have told Tracy already. Like they were, after all, a pair at Camp Emerson, just like Walter and Lowell were. The silence between them persisted a while until Tracy heard Walter sniff loudly once. He was crying, she realized. He's amazing, said Walter, isn't he? Oh, wait, I skipped a page here. So I was like, why did it go to... No, wait, I don't think I... No, I didn't skip. Okay. No, okay. Louise, August 1975. She saw everything. She sat on the edge of the stage that overlooked the community room, watching her campers in all of their triumphs and failures, the ones having genuine fun, the ones pretending to have it. If she believed in a God, it was in one who functioned something like Louise in this moment, rooting for her charges from afar, mourning alongside them when they were rejected, celebrating every small victory that came their way. She noticed the lonely ones, the ones at the edge of the crowd. She felt in her heart a sort of wild affection for them, wanted to go to them, to stand next to them and pull them tightly to her side. And yet, she also knew that to intervene in this way would disrupt something sacred that at 12 and 13 and 14 years old, were learning about themselves and the world. And this too was how she thought of God. At a certain point, she began to play a game in her mind, counting each one of her charges, picking a name and scanning the crowd until she found the person in question. With every name she chose, she was successful until she got to Annabelle. She couldn't find her counselor in training any place in the room. In retrospect, this would make a different kind of sense to her. Just then, she chalked it up to her suspicion that session that Annabelle had met a boy. Earlier, she had noticed that Annabelle was getting ready with particular care. In theory, the dance was for the campers, but in prior years, Louise had often seen counselors and CITs pairing off there too, going out into the dark woods for a few minutes or an hour, coming back flushed. This, she suspected, was where Annabelle Southward had gone, and from her place on the stage, she smiled, happy that Annabelle too had found love, or at least infatuation, at Camp Emerson. Judita, day 3. Who's everyone? Asked Denny Hayes. It's already noon, and this is the first time she's seeing him. She's half in and half out of his car when she launches into her updates, the new theories she's formed since this morning. The whole town, says Judy now, every person in Shattuck thinks the wrong man was blamed when Bear disappeared, and the Van Lairs were too quick to accept it. Hayes tilts his head in the direction of the command post in the director's cabin. Come on, he says, I need coffee. Together they walk. He glances at her. Judy, were you wearing the same outfit yesterday? She flushes. Don't remember, she says. It's still raining on and off, and her hair and clothing have gotten soaked and partially dried several times over. She must look like a drowned rat, she thinks. Judy, says Hayes, where exactly did you hear this about Bear Van Lair? She tells him what happened last night, and early this morning, he raises an eyebrow. They've reached the director's cabin now, and he holds the door open for her. Judy goes inside first, reflects for a moment on the time capsule decorations, the World War II era kitchen appliances, all of which clearly predate the director herself. Judy has seen her only a few times, wandering about the grounds. Each time she's looked beside herself with anguish, more distraught, she thinks Judy, than the Van Lair parents themselves. Hayes pours himself a mug of coffee, holds one out to her as well. She takes it. She's never been much of a coffee drinker. It's something she associates with older people, with her own father, but since being on the Van Lair Preserve, she has begun appreciating its bitterness and warmth, which now cuts through the wetness of her hair and clothing. She sips, grimaces, sips again. So who does the town of Shattuck think is to blame, says Hayes, if Carl Stoddard was innocent? Well, according to Mr. Alcott, there are 2 prevailing theories. I'm all ears. The first, says Judy, is that Jacob Sluter did it. He looks at her. Weren't you the one asking me about Sluter yesterday? Well, yes, says Judy, but it makes sense, doesn't it? Good old Sluter, Hayes says, the boogeyman of the North Woods. I've heard him blamed for every death, accidental or intentional, from here to Rochester. He leans against the counter. It's not crazy, Judy. The majority of Sluter's killings took place not far, all of them in the early 60s, right when Bear disappeared, right before Sluter was caught. True. And now, she says, he's escaped right at the same time that Barbara Van Lair goes missing. Am I saying something wrong? She stops, annoyed. Hayes is laughing. The bug, he says. What bug? It's a good thing, he says. We've all got the bug. Go on. The second theory is more popular in the town, says Judy, and one you won't like to hear. Why not? Well, it's more controversial, I guess, she says. It'll make more waves. Go on. She sips from her coffee, steadying her nerves. Mr. Alcott says that the majority of people in Shattuck, the ones who don't think Sluter did it, anyway, think that Bear's grandfather is to blame. She expects him to scoff. Instead, he turns and looks out the window. Oh, thank you, Leroyal, again. No. His hands on the counter next to the sink. He's quiet for long enough that she gets worried. Are you all right? She says. I remember that theory, says Hayes. I remember it being spoken of when the boy went missing. Judy stares at him. Why hadn't he mentioned this before? She had interviewed the man her first day here, according to Hayes. He was a minor player, someone above suspicion. Frantically, she searches her memory for anything he said that sounded suspicious. But all she can remember is his demeanor, dismissive, impatient, unkind. What happened? Judy asks. Was he interviewed back then? Did anyone in the BCI think he did it too? According to the records I've been going through, says Hayes, some did, but no one pursued it. Why didn't they? Hayes pauses. Well, he says, couple reasons. Carl Stoddard seemed pretty suspicious to everyone, according to some of the guys here who've been around long enough to remember. He was the last person to see Bear. There was some carving that was found, a whittled bear that Bear had apparently been carrying just before he disappeared. That was the only trace of the boy that was ever located. Turned out Stoddard had been the one teaching him to whittle. Everyone thought he had a kind of obsession with Bear. Judy waits. Second, he says, the Van Layer's attorney liked him for the crime, and he was aggressive from the start. Now it's Hayes's turn to wait for Judy to catch up. McClellan, says Judy. He nods. Senior, says Judy. Hayes nods again. Judy thinks. Can I take this lead, she says. Bear's grandfather, says Hayes, and Judy nods. She can talk to people like him, she thinks. She knows how. All right, as long as you don't scare him off, says Denny Hayes. He's right up there at the main house, as far as I know. Before she can set off, there's a knock on the front door of the director's cabin, and Investigator Goldman comes in, panting, shirt untucked. He looks from Judy to Hayes to Judy again. Either of you good with kids? He asks, doing his best to phrase the question neutrally, but his implication is clear. Judy, as a woman, will take this one. All right, so we'll pick it up on the next chapter tomorrow. Oh, thank you, Jerry. It's Judita again, so I think it goes like immediately. Whatever they're talking about. I hear a lot from Alice tonight, but the part we got was interesting because she's like, her husband is so weird. So he's like, they were like getting along, and then they weren't, and there was something with her sister. I feel like the timeline's so important. So trying to pay attention because this was Bear was still alive, and they referenced the sister with Bear. And then also remember that the sister, when she saw Alice at the hospital, said, I'm sorry. And how Alice is going crazy. Like, so I don't know. Um, we'll see if we find out more tomorrow. Um, late last night, I got 2 bags done more. So it was after midnight. I was having trouble falling asleep because I'm very depressed, and also I was afraid of, I have a hard time waking up, because a lot of the pain comes back to me. Sad feelings, like, they flood into me, and that initial rush of pain in the morning and terror can be so overwhelming on my system, is so hard. And then it's not just like for a second, it can last the whole day. It can get worse. It can like, but it hits really hard, and it's like almost like I worry I'll have like a heart attack just waking up to it. S Sometimes it's like it lurks in before I even wake up that so I dread going to sleep sometimes, and last night I was productive enough to getting the 2 bags, but then I thought I should try to go to sleep. Took an antihistamine, did fall asleep, and I had a lot of trouble waking up, so um, I don't know, tonight, if I can't sleep for a bit before I take something, maybe I'll see if I get another bag, but I did make a little progress at least, so, um, I love you very much. I think I took a picture or 2 I could post. Oh, and I couldn't say goodnight because they were doing maintenance last night. I don't know if you saw that, on your pitch, like, I know Jerry did it too, but if all of you, if you were worried about me, yeah, I couldn't get on because of maintenance, but anyway, I love you so much. I see you tomorrow.